Hey everyone, welcome back to Pop Goes the Stack, the only show where move fast and break things is more of a spoiler than a strategy. I'm Lori McVitie, and I'm here to help you survive the fallout. I'm, as usual, joined by our co-host, Joel Moses.
Oh, it's good to
You
be
could
here,
say hi.
Lori.
Yes, there
Hello.
you go. I forgot to give him his instructions
That's
before,
right.
so
Thank you
he's
for the prompt.
yes. All right.
Thank you for the
I'll
prompt.
do better. Well, that's a great segue. It's a great segue, and it's the reason we brought Jason Williams here. Jason, hi.
Hello. Thanks for
Is
having me.
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, you may not thank us when we're done, so hang out on that.
All right.
The core premise today that we wanted to talk about is prompt injection. Okay.
Yeah.
And I use the scare quotes because it's not really an injection in the traditional sense that we talk about things like SQL injection, right? Code injection. It's really more system prompt manipulation because it's actually a feature. It's by design. It's not a bug. And what we're seeing is these things are being shared. There is an entire GitHub repo full of a number of, exfiltration of system prompts and other ways to manipulate system prompts to get it to say things it shouldn't, to expose
Yeah.
information it shouldn't. And
Yeah.
that's what we wanted to talk about today is, we're crossing the streams.
Yeah.
We weren't supposed to. Ghostbusters told us not to, but
Yeah.
here we are. We've crossed the streams, the system commands, and the user input, and now we have a mess. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's start with what a system prompt is, Jason. What is a system prompt, and why is it so critical if the system prompt is obtained? Why do foundational AI systems want to protect that?
Yeah. So you can think of like a system prompt as a set of instructions on how the model should be, interacting and replying to any given input that's receiving. And probably the very common ones you hear are, hey, you're a helpful assistant, make sure you only respond in a very kind manner, right? So there are a set of instructions that are sent along with the initial conversation to the model to give it some operational, like, hey, respond kindly and only respond in this section and only respond in English. So they're basically a set of instructions to the model on how it should be behaving, and those are usually applied when at the time of the deployment of the model by the developers.
Okay. And how have they changed over time? I mean, obviously, prompt injection has been a factor to try to get around the system prompt that governs these systems. But over time, system prompts have grown from being very simple, just descriptions of how you should act, to very sophisticated. So what are some of the things that today a system prompt would have relative to yesterday?
Yeah, you're right. They started out really, really basic and simple, just to, hey, you're do this, don't do that. And then I think the initial start of prompt injection, the most famous one is probably ignore previous instructions. There was this realization like we need to try to wrap us around as much security in this prompt because we know that's going to be the attack vector that these malicious users are going to go for through inputting through natural language to the model. So these prompts have grown significantly, just not only just complexity, but length as well. So sometimes you look at some of these prompts that people have been able to exploit, there are multiple lines of like what they should and should do or how they should respond or what they shouldn't even respond to. So we're continuing to see those grow and evolve because the prompt injection is probably the number one threat to generative AI today. And if you look at OWASP top 10 for GenAI, prompt injection is listed as number one because that's the first barrier to get through. And then once you get the prompt and the instructions, at that point, there's the risk of like data leakage or even misinformation from the model that could be quite ugly. I mean, we've heard about all those incidences where like somebody got a car for $1 from a dealership interacting through an AI assistant. And, somebody ordered like 9,000 chicken McNuggets through I think it was McDonald's drive-in. So those are all kind of things that you could potentially, open yourself up to. So.
I hadn't heard about that one, and that sounds terrible. Unless you have a really large football team, maybe. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or just a really fun Friday night.
Yeah. Well, really bad Saturday morning.
Yeah. So it seems to me, looking at some of these things over time, the ones that have been exfiltrated, they've moved from just describing how the system is intended to behave to describing what the system can do and have access to, and what its constraints are, what it should not do.
Yeah.
Those seem to be the major themes. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. And I think, also too, with the constant evolution of AI, right now we have like tools and function calling, which actually allow the LMs to reach out and do additional things here. You have to incorporate that into the system prompt as well, because that really wasn't there initially. But now as this continues to evolve from a technological point, there's more potential vectors that can be exploited through the model and the system prompts. Like, hey, don't use this tool, or you can only use this tool, which didn't exist a couple of years ago. So they're all things you have to take into consideration when you're designing your system prompt with that model.
Well, and for people who aren't familiar with tools and how those works, I mean, it's a lot like executing a shell script in a web application, right? We let that happen a lot. That was how the web was originally built, right? Sadly. And we had to keep restricting to the point where we said, okay, you can't do it at all now. Like that's a no-no. So are we headed that way, right? Do you think AI is ever going to stop that? Because that would kind of, I don't know, would kind of destroy some of the usefulness in many scenarios.
I think it would be, I think if you, to your point, I think if you stopped it outright, you would really kind of limit the capabilities of AI, right? Entirely, right? So I think the broader, bigger question is like, well, how do we keep these capabilities, tool function calling into this, and reduce the security risk that's associated with those to make sure that we can still be productive, but not open ourselves up to a breach of some sort. So I think that's the big challenge.
So Jason, if say I'm an attacker, and what I really want to do is find ways to kind of work around some of the restrictions of these systems or learn more about them. Tell me about something the system prompt might contain that would tell me about the system or would give me an idea about how to get around it.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things part of prompt injection is that, there's this conversation that exists between the user via prompt and then through up to the model itself. And so one of the, tricks, and we can talk about this, is prompt injection, and maybe we could touch about jailbreaking in a moment here, because they are definitely related, just slightly different in how you attack it. So, but on that point, a prompt injection is meant to go after the system prompt itself, what we've actually been talking about, right? How do I expose what's in that prompt, which could be like, hey, you're a helpful assistant, only answer questions about, let's just say, like science fiction, right? Only answer in English and stuff. So you can leak all those potential items out through the course of a conversation, just kind of gently, almost poking at, like kind of like prodding and poking at it to get it to kind of come back with your prompts. So that's, and then once you get that and you've kind of told them what its prompt is, then there are ways you can, craft even more clever prompts to get around the prompt that you now know. So that would be one way to, and so that one of the slight differences, because I know jailbreaking comes up quite a bit as well, in line with prompt injection. They're kind of in the same bucket, but I would say where like prompt injection goes after the system prompt, jailbreaking goes after it goes after the instructions. Prompt injection goes after the instructions, but like jailbreaking goes after like the safeguards that have actually been trained and fine-tuned in the model itself through a very, very long, sophisticated conversation. And you've probably heard those ones where like, hey, you're a scientist locked in this cavern and you're trying to get out, and through the course of this dialogue, you're able to manipulate the model through jailbreaking to tell you how to make it like an explosive to get your way out of the cave, right? What it shouldn't be doing, but that's the way to kind of obfuscate and get around those prompts and safeguards. So
yeah. So I did a little spelunking through some of the exfiltrated system prompts. Spelunking, digging in and looking around.
I got the reference. I was groaning because,
Thank you, Lori. I did a little spelunking, and outside of a lot of mentions of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I found really interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Some things that I noticed were that some of the system prompts contain information about the tools that they have access to. One of the more prominent ones being browser. If you are asked a question, you don't know the answer necessarily, or you need up-to-date information, there will be some information about that. You have a tool called browser, and here's how it works, and here's what you're supposed to allow, and here's what you're not supposed to allow. If I'm an attacker and I know that tool is present there, how would I go about figuring ways to use that tool improperly?
Yeah, there's kind of been an opening of like promptware lately right now, right? And when I think about the browser, it kind of makes me spooky. It kind of spooky, right, to think that something could potentially control a browser and then point me somewhere that I could drop some malicious code on it. But yeah, if you had access to those tools, maybe there's a way you can manipulate that tool and hijack the browser, point to a compromised site, download the malware, and hey, that user may never know. That's a little frightening when you kind of think about that, but you also think about how this AI space is growing so rapidly and all the security risks that are actually associated with it.
Right. Now, one of the other things system prompts often contain are information about what it should not say.
Yeah.
Safety, ethics, content filtering. These are expressions of both, I guess, liability protection on the part of the company that generated the model, but also just in general, what ethically they should say about things that they should talk about. Knowing that, what can an attacker make use of if they know the guidelines there?
They could probably, the thing that first comes to mind is they could leak out sensitive information, kind of pull sensitive information out. Like if you're going after, say, like let's say a bank of some sort, right? You could potentially have the leakage of sensitive information from a bunch of bank accounts, right? That's a real risk. And to your point, Joel, one of the things that you talk about this, like you should only answer questions about a certain topic. I mean, like if you have a chatbot that's working at a bank, there's no reason why I should be answering any questions about healthcare or like how to take care of somebody, right? I mean, those are those real things that are a problem that people need to be aware of, so they don't, like, why did your chatbot tell me how to, do this? And you're a bank, right? That's a risk there, and that comes up pretty frequently, So. But yeah, it's a real challenge. But yeah, to your point, yeah, they could leak out information, get information about the company, its customers, any of that once they gain access to that system prompt.
Yeah, and I want to go back to this tool thing because this really bugs me because we're talking just about models and chatbots right now. But agents are real. People are deploying them. They're starting to build out agentic architectures. And one of the premises is that these agents will be able to call different tools you set up, external tools. They'll be able to build their own tools, I'm told. Though, that's another issue, right? So, I mean, the notion that you can manipulate those or need to restrict them, on the other side, right, is a real problem for agents because you can't restrict them so much they can't do their job because you don't know what they might need to do. And changing the system prompt may be necessary when they call a tool. If you've got a general agent that is schooled in multiple functions in the business, you might say, hey, right now you're an accountant, right now you're HR. And so now you need to use prompt injection, as it were, in order to, right? So now it becomes a tool. So, I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, traditional tools that we have to like check this, prevent this, watch it, audit it, right? They don't watch at that level, right? They watch packets, connections, flows, messages, but they don't necessarily dig into what are you trying to do? So how do we approach that, right? If we want to get a handle on it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think to your point, Lori, one of the things is that AI is evolving so rapidly and everybody's using it today. And, there's, before the release of tools, you are relying upon that model you're interacting with to have the most updated information or have something that may, it may have, you're looking for it to have information, but the tools extended that functionality beyond what it was trained on, which really opened up that capability to use AI. And I think the challenge is like, how do we control those tools without breaking the functionality that everyone is now using as every part of their daily use, right? At that point. And then there's the agent thing, which I think is so rapidly evolving. And I mean, if you think about it, MCP was released almost a year ago and it kind of went a little bit up and then it just took off. And then right along with that was the agents. And now we have agents and agentic AI, and now they're going to be autonomous. Those are some real things that need to be considered because we don't want to break it, but we also need to secure it and make sure it doesn't harm us. So those are real things that we think about a lot, like, okay, how are we going to tackle this and make sure it doesn't get out of hand?
So if you think about in the intents and the constraints that are encoded into a system prompt as being a form of guardrail, and I think that's classically what they are. I think that that right now a lot of models spend a lot of time on the system prompt engineering in order to create and enforce guardrails. And of course, people do obtain system prompts and have knowledge then of what the guardrails actually are and where they are. Do you see a future where the guardrail systems have to move outside of the system prompt? And what
I
would that
do.
look like?
Yeah, I definitely think that's because there's only so much, there's only, you can put those prompts and you can change them, but it always, defense in depth, we go back to like historically I was in security for a while. So if you could add more pieces to protecting those, incoming requests using other technology that can actually scan those prompts, right? We'll look inside those prompts and maybe look for, oh, look, here's a direct attempt to somebody trying to get the instructions so that you can block it, notify, whatever you want to do there. But another layer to inspect those requests to make sure you're providing yourself with the most updated security. But I definitely think that's going to be a requirement, especially as AI continues to grow. I mean, it is just rapidly going up. So I think the risk is if you don't do anything, you really open yourself up to potentially being, hey, you leaked information, you're compromised, AI malware, AI worms, all those things are a real threat if you don't really take the measures needed to protect yourself.
Yeah, it might be that, prompt as policy is just not a scalable or sustainable method of securing AI.
Yeah.
Right?
Lori, that's an interesting point. In going through that GitHub repo of leaked system prompts, I did note one thing. Historically, prompts have not gotten smaller. They've only ever gotten larger and larger and larger. At what point does the system prompt and the amount of guardrails that it has to contain become an expense to the system, not a benefit?
That's a great point, because I think one of the, there's all these attempts to kind of bake in protections into the model through the tuning and the safeguards themselves, like the training and the tuning, right? And then you have the system prompts that are continuing to evolve as well. But I think as these models continue to grow and evolve and get more sophisticated, that opens up the door for, hey, how are we going to continue to keep these safe as best we can out of the box? And I think there's only so much you're going to be able to do, because, I mean, look at how much has come out in the last year. That repo, Joel, you were looking at, I took a look at those well, and I saw some very clever crafted system prompts that have evolved,
Yeah.
So,
well,
and I think you're seeing that. Yeah.
Yeah. To Joel's point, I mean, right, there is a technique today, right? The loading of models in real time based on what you need. And the time it takes to actually load a model is going to be impacted by system prompt growth. The bigger it gets, the longer it's going to take to load. So that process of doing it dynamically is going to become prohibitive in terms of performance and delay, and then probably, as Joel points out, cost in terms of memory, right? Memory actually costs, especially if you're in the cloud, right? Compute's not cheap.
No, it's not.
So
there's operational costs that are going to continue to decrease as these get more sophisticated and grow.
Yeah.
Well, Lori, I think one of my takeaways from today, I have kind of had, through the review of the GitHub repo and the conversation today, a renewed interest in looking at the system prompt and assessing it like an attacker would. It contains a lot of really useful information that attackers can use to devise ways to get around things. So protection of the system prompt is really important. I also learned that the guardrails in system prompting, that you shouldn't just stop there. You should probably look at guardrails that are external to the system prompt in order to provide a check and balance approach to system security.
Yep.
Absolutely. I learned that, the traditional security we have is not enough. We need stuff that's more specialized, that, looks at language, that, I mean, prompts as policy, just not going to be long-term the way we do things. And architecture is going to be in play again. How do we architect secure systems, not how do we secure AI, right? The focus will change. I think that's what I'm hearing, is that we have to start moving toward that security as architecture rather than as, individual pain points.
Jason, any takeaways from the conversation today?
No, I think this was really good. I was going to just say, I think one of the more interesting things in regards to AI and prompt injection, and Laura, I think you mentioned this earlier, is that it's not code. It's not like malicious code that you have to craft and actually have to try to get it onto the system to kind of take over the system. But instead, you're just using natural language to try to manipulate a system to get it to do your bidding, right? And I think it's a very new frontier that's continuing to evolve, and it's going to be, it's always a challenge. But I think, it's kind of fascinates me in that regard.
Yeah. Who knew the attackers of the future would be the ones with linguistics degrees?
Linguistics, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Language is suddenly important. My pedantry is going to be useful. I feel good today.
There's hope yet, Lori.
There's hope yet. All right. Well, that is a wrap for Pop Goes the Stack. Smash subscribe before the disruption marketing teams keep promising actually arrives.